Stay alert, a strand of hair suddenly sprouted from the woman's eye. Terrified, she immediately pulled it out. This bizarre event lasted for 3 days. Then, hair began to grow on her fingers. The woman was horrified. She endured the pain and tried to pluck it out. But when she pulled lightly, more hair emerged from her fingers. It was far worse than she could imagine. In shock, the woman collapsed to the ground. She noticed a small wound on her arm. She hadn't even had time to treat it. She stood up and opened her mouth, and found it was filled with hair. The woman was completely petrified. The hair seemed alive, growing uncontrollably. It was everywhere. She screamed and dashed out of the bathroom. But when she touched her tongue again, the hair had vanished. She sighed in relief. But then, her hair stood straight, piercing through the ceiling. She found herself unable to move. The hair didn't cause pain, surprisingly. As long as you watch this video, it won't harm you either. But now the hair grew tighter and tighter, dragging her onto the roof. Seconds later, she fell to the ground. Massive clumps of hair erupted from her body. This wasn't the first case of death by hair. Kiwa had bought a wig collection. Her boyfriend carelessly sat on one. When he raised his arm, hair began to grow inside his arm. Moments later, a terrifying white line appeared. Crossing it would prove fatal. You'll receive an unexpected warm welcome. But the arrogant man refused to believe it. He glanced at the cows and sheep lying lifeless by the roadside, and smirked with contempt. With a single motion, he drove his Ferrari across the white line. The very next moment, his eyes rolled back, and he dropped lifelessly. At that moment, every villager within the white line, whether showering, working, or relaxing at home, or even attending outdoor celebrations, were all struck down, without exception. Even caged birds, pets outside, and livestock grazing in the fields succumbed. 2 officers stepped over the white line and collapsed within 3 seconds. The bustling scene was immediately frozen in silence. The authorities suspected a bioweapon attack and called in a fearless intern. Equipped with a gas mask, he cautiously entered the white line. But 3 seconds in, he too collapsed. The team quickly pulled him back with a rope, just in time to save his life. As everyone panicked, unsure of what to do, the cows and sheep were the first to awaken. They stood up as if nothing had happened. Moments later, 2 officers who had crossed the line regained consciousness. One by one, the villagers awoke. The truth was finally revealed. The village was cursed. Every day at precisely 4 p.m., all life within the white line would lose consciousness, while some awoke unscathed. Others were not so lucky. Suddenly, sulfuric acid rain began to pour. A man's face was instantly burned away. Nearby, a teddy bear melted. Even the asphalt couldn't withstand the acid. The car was instantly destroyed. Reduced to a pile of scrap metal, inside, a baby sat quietly. Oblivious to the chaos outside, the baby stared blankly. As the car's glass slowly dissolved in the acid rain, the world had turned into a living nightmare. A hellscape of panic and despair. Screams echoed all around, as people frantically fled for safety. A family of 3, realizing the danger, hopped on their scooter, racing toward the shelter. But midway, the scooter broke down. Out of options, the parents armed their son, equipping him with a sturdy helmet. After an arduous journey spanning days, they finally reached the sanctuary. But the dark side of human nature came to light. Those who arrived first claimed the shelter as their own. A group armed with weapons drove away new refugees. The family, weak from their journey, desperately needed water. The father braved gunfire, water from a guarded room? In exchange, he handed over his son's toy. Meanwhile, the mother and child heard distant thunder. Signaling more acid rain, they ran for their lives. The father caught up with them, but the acid rain was close behind. Thinking quickly, he grabbed a sheet of metal, using it to shield his wife and child. Exposed to the rain himself, his body began to sizzle and burn. Within moments, his flesh and blood began to dissolve. The man's hands were reduced to raw tissue, but the man never let go of the metal sheet in his hands. It seemed like they were so close to the cave. When the man finally collapsed, the mother and child, shielded by him, scrambled into the cave. They were safe. But outside, chaos reigned supreme. The man staggered to his feet, his vision blurry, and saw a massive man pass by him. In an instant, the man crumpled like paper. The man could hardly believe his eyes. He turned his gaze to a young woman on her phone. Her body twisted unnaturally into 3 sections. Her skirt twirled in midair, defying gravity, a bizarre, hypnotic dance. She noticed his stare and bolted, running 2 miles in seconds, but when he turned back to the street, he was greeted with even stranger sights. A smiling woman draped in thick gold chains walked like a living QR code. Another woman balanced a giant bag on her head, walking with uncanny precision. The man looked at the surreal scene, his thoughts a chaotic storm of disbelief. Nearby, a vendor seemed outfitted with plugins, his body covered in blinking gadgets, and a woman nearby had somehow fallen in love with a tree. A man split himself in 2, his left hand dragging his right hand as they crossed the street. The man froze, paralyzed by terror. He stepped back instinctively, only to bump into a towering black-clad figure. Turning around, he mumbled an apology, but in his eyes, the man morphed into a colossal being. Like a pillar of the heavens, overcome with panic, he instinctively slapped the figure, and now, he was going to pay the price. The younger man stood nearby. He grabbed the stranger and pinned him against the wall. The boss in black stepped forward confidently. The younger man gave a quick glance. He tightly gripped the stranger's wrist. Their teamwork was seamless. Clearly, this wasn't their first time doing this, allowing the sludge to flow into a contained space. She panicked and tried to shield her face, but half of it had already collapsed. Her legs began dissolving rapidly. Everyone stared. The waiter froze, horrified by the unfolding chaos. She tried to escape, stumbling toward the door. But after a few steps, she crumpled to the ground. Her body turned into a grotesque puddle. The mass spread, consuming the entire room. It smashed through windows and spilled onto the streets. Terrified pedestrians ran in all directions. Cars screeched to abrupt halts. One vehicle smashed into a transformer. The woman's allies looked on in shock. Their expressions were filled with disbelief. They called out her name frantically, desperately hoping to bring her back to herself. But their voices seemed powerless.